truth, which is a person, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the absolute truth. It's not possible for us to understand Krishna without the benefit of a pure devotee. It's just not possible. It's not possible. We can try. But it's only by the mercy of a pure devotee on the level of Srila Prabhupada, who brought Krishna consciousness not only to the Western world, the Northern world and the Southern world, and the Eastern world as well. On the first occasion that Srila Prabhupada met his spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada was raised in a Vaishnava family. His father was a pure devotee. And his father was always inviting guests to his home. Srila Prabhupada mentions that every night there was at least 2 or 3. And, many of them were dressed like swamis and sadhus, but they were little more than just beggars. So Prabhupada had the opportunity, even when he was raised as a child, to recognize in different grades and different degrees of saintly persons, even as a child. And through his schooling years and university, you continue to recognize persons who weren't really saintly persons, but he knew a person that was in his neighborhood. He had his family, and when everyone else in the neighborhood got up and went to work, he put on his saffron dhoti and kurta and he went out to beg. He had his family and all, but his business was just begging. So Srila Prabhupada knew there were those kinds of persons in the world. So one of his friends, his name was Narendranath Mullik, and he became a famous. Why do I know his name? Why do I know Narendranath Mullik's name? Because he was the person who forced Srila Prabhupada to meet Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, his spiritual master. He had met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta on a previous evening, and he wanted to get Srila Prabhupada's, Abhay Charan's, opinion of this saintly person. And when he informed, they were walking home in the evening, when Narendranath mentioned to Srila Prabhupada that we could go and see this saintly person, Prabhupada said, no thank you. No thank you. I've seen enough saintly persons. But Narendranath wasn't going to take no for an answer. He wasn't going to take no for an answer. So he actually grabbed Abhay's, Srila Prabhupada's arm, and began kind of dragging him. And Srila Prabhupada was resisting him. And it was almost to the point where they were going to get to fight about it. Because Prabhupada didn't want to go, and Narendranath wanted him to go. So it got to the point where they were tugging each other, and in order to not make a big scene, then Prabhupada agreed to go along. So, when Srila Prabhupada went up and met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Prabhupada had the etiquette. He knew when you see a saintly person, you offer your obeisances, you offer your pranams. So they both bowed down before Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and before they could even get up off the floor, even before they could get up off the floor, putting their heads to the floor, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta requested Srila Prabhupada, "Oh, you're such nice young gentlemen. Why don't you teach the message of Lord Chaitanya in the English language?" They had met Narendranath the evening before, so they knew he was well educated, not just in Bengali, but in English as well. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta made that statement even before they had exchanged pleasantries, any pleasantries at all. So Srila Prabhupada, he had resisted going to see Srila Bhaktisiddhanta because he had already made an impression. He had already made a judgment of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta before they'd even met him. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was a lot more than what Srila Prabhupada had planned. And Srila Prabhupada was a follower of Gandhi. He was a follower of Gandhi. Gandhi was teaching agrarian life. He was teaching that Indians should depend on themselves. They shouldn't depend on British goods. They shouldn't be slaves to British imports, clothing. Srila Prabhupada was a pharmaceutical at some time. Srila Prabhupada became involved in selling pharmaceuticals. He had a pharmacy in Allahabad. And one of his customers, some of his customers were the Nehrus. The Nehrus. Jawaharlal Nehru and his family. And when they came into the pharmacy, they only wanted British. Only British. So this is what the British had conditioned the Indian people to believe, that anything British was good and anything Indian was bad. Whether it was the education, whether it was religious teachings, spiritual understanding, if it came from England, it was good, and anything coming out of India was bad. So Srila Prabhupada was a follower of Gandhi who reversed that tendency. And Srila Prabhupada immediately, he challenged, though we say one should inquire submissively, Srila Prabhupada challenged Srila Bhaktisiddhanta that who will listen to your teachings of Lord Chaitanya when India is a subjugated country? Subjugated country. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he replied that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who's running the country. It doesn't matter who's in control of the political situation. He said that Krishna consciousness is so important, it's so exclusively important that it cannot wait. It cannot wait. And Srila Prabhupada was astounded by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's statement. But as he listened more and more, then he became convinced that the mission of Lord Chaitanya was in the hands of a very qualified and pure devotee. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta requested them to preach in the Western world, to the Western world. So Srila Prabhupada did that. At the age of 60, he left India and he traveled by freighter boat, the Jaladuta, for 3 weeks. And he landed in Boston and eventually in New York with no help He had a contact that he stayed with for some weeks. But then eventually he set out on his own in New York City to try to fulfill the order of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. So he mentioned that for 1 year he struggled. 1 year he struggled, moving from different places in order to see if he could sell his books. When Prabhupada came, he came with 40 rupees. 40 rupees? What's the exchange rate now? 4 rupees to a rand and 20 rands to a dollar. So what is it? $7. Back then it was $7. In America. He only had 40 rupees, but he brought a few trunkloads of his books. He had waited till he could publish the first volume of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and he brought those books in order to distribute Krishna consciousness and to earn a living. So he was visiting different bookshops and convincing the owners to take his books, and that's how he was maintaining himself for up to a year. Up to a year. He was living in some